Welcome to the Vintage Times, a program for older persons. On our program today, we will talk about memory and what we can do to improve our memory by keeping an active mind and building mental power. Many of us worry about our memory. We get upset when we lose our keys, when we forget a name or a place, and we worry that this may mean Alzheimer's disease or another form of dementia. The good news is that most people do not get Alzheimer's. It is also good to know that we have the power to control our brain by keeping it active and living a healthy lifestyle. We'll discuss memory today with Robin Pisak, who is with the Arden Courts Memory Care Community. And thank you, Robin, for joining us and for coming back.
You're welcome. Thanks so much for having me.
And can you first describe your profession and where you work, what you do?
Sure. Arden Courts is a community, assisted living community that was exclusively designed after 5 years of research just for persons with memory loss.
Okay.
So everything about our design and the layout is all geared specifically to meet the special needs of a person with memory loss. The way the building is laid out is designed for freedom, to allow our residents to have the freedom of movement, but yet still be safe and secure in an environment that provides mentally and physically stimulating programs for our residents and focuses on really what they can still do rather than what their deficits might be.
Oh, that's so important. You focus on what you can do. That's wonderful. And you're located in Glen Ellen, right?
Yes.
So they're right here locally, a very nice facility. Now, you talked about memory. Can you briefly describe what is memory?
Sure. Memory is the process that our brain has whereby we receive information, we process that information, we retain that information, and then eventually we retrieve that information. That's basically what memory is.
Okay, now there are two types of memories?
There are two different types of memories, which most people have probably heard of, short-term memory and long-term memory. Our short-term memory is really our active memory. That's where we're receiving new information and within about 20 to 30 seconds deciding what we're going to do with that information, whether it's going to be put into our long-term memory or not. So it's very active, and it's also snippets of information. It might just be 7 to 10 pieces of information that we're able to process at one time in our short-term memory. So we call that active memory. It's what we're thinking about right now.
Right.
And then our long-term memory is the memories that we've retained in our memory bank, and that could last our lifespan. It could last a couple of weeks, it could last a few days, or it could be many, many years, decades. And our long-term memory is really broken down into two parts. It's our declarative memory and our procedural memory. So declarative memory is information about facts and figures and any type of factual data. And with that we have our episodic memory. That's our memory that is specific to us. So it's things like remembering our anniversary or our children's birthdays or the memories of our wedding day, the memories of the birth of our first child, things of that nature. And then we have our semantic memory, which is also part of our declarative memory. Semantic memory is things like world knowledge, remembering things like who are the presidents, things like the fact that Madrid is located in Spain, any type of factual information that isn't necessarily particularly specifically relevant to us, but it's factual information about the world.
Very interesting, different types of information. Now, is there a change in our memory and how we retrieve information as we get older?
There is. Our memory does change, and probably most older adults can recognize that and feel that there are some changes that happen in their memory as they get older. And that's very common. There are very typical changes that are normal changes that happen in our brain. One of those is that our brain actually does lose a little bit of volume. Some parts of our brain even can lose up to 1% of their volume every year. And that's really why we have things like we might take us longer to retrieve or learn new information. So when we get older, it might take us a little bit longer to learn something new. Things like learning the computer or learning how to text message your grandkids. Yeah. Many older adults have learned how to use a computer or learned how to text message if they do that from their grandkids. And so it might take us longer to learn new information, but the good news is we still can learn new information. And that's important to try to do things like learning new things, learning a new language. And we'll talk, I know we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But the other thing that happens with our brain is it might take us longer to retrieve information. Okay. So that's also very common part of normal aging, is to take us a little bit longer to retrieve the information that we've learned over our lifespan. And if you think about it, Hannah, as we get older, we have a lot of things in our brains that we've learned over our lifetime. So basically, if you picture your brain as like a filing cabinet, right, you have a lot of things in your filing cabinet, and it might take you a little bit longer to go through those things. But eventually, a normal part of aging would be for us to be able to recall those items. It might not be at the time that you want to be able to recall it. So, for example, if you're having lunch with a girlfriend and you're talking about an actor from a movie from the 50s and you can't quite think of that person's name, but when you're getting ready for bed at night and you're brushing your teeth, that name might pop in your head. So it's things like that that can happen as we get older, or the tip of the tongue syndrome, where you can't quite think of the name for something, but eventually it might come to you. And that is all very normal parts of an aging brain, those things to happen. Okay. And really what it comes down to is when we learn new information, everything goes through essentially a certain part of our brain, and that's our hippocampus. And as we get older, if you recall, I talked about how our brain volume changes, and there are some physiological changes that take place in our brain. Some of that is in our hippocampus. And so therefore, the retention process, the learning process, and processing that happens with our brain changes as we age. So naturally, it takes us a little bit longer to retrieve those things too.
So that's very comforting. It just takes longer. It doesn't mean we've lost it.
Right.
Yeah. It did happen to me that the retrieval took a long time, and it's an indication that your brain keeps searching for the information, even if you're not aware of it. It just keeps searching.
It happens subconsciously, and it might happen that an hour later or a few hours later, it might come back to you. Now, there are certain parts of our memory as we get older that we may not be able to retrieve. Things that, information that maybe is not as important to us specifically. Right. Things like the name of somebody you met a few years ago, and somebody that maybe you didn't have a lot of dealings with. You might not remember that person's name. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have memory loss, but it might mean that you've had other people that you've met throughout your life, and the memory of that has just faded away simply because it wasn't extremely relevant to you.
Right. So your brain makes decisions what's important and what isn't.
Right.
Yeah, probably emotional events are probably more important than factual events of some sort.
The other thing that happens, with your memory too, is in talking about the two different types of memory. Declarative memory, as I mentioned before, is one part of our memory. The other part is our procedural memory, and that is really where we remember things like learning how to ride a bike. Somebody that, whether you're 10 years old or you're 70 years old, if you have known how to ride a bike, if you step on that bike after 3 or 4 years of not riding a bike, you're probably still going to know the basic things of what to do on how to ride a bike, or brushing your teeth, or things that we don't even have to really think about knowing how to do. We just can do those. That's our procedural memory. And in older persons, that also stays intact. And specifically with people with memory loss, that part of our memory stays intact much longer.
Okay, that's
than the factual.
The factual. So there's certain things I don't need to worry about. Certain short-term memory or long-term will come back. What are the warning signs that this might not be just a normal part of memory, but might be dementia?
Right. As we talked about, there are certain things that are very normal. Like, for example, it's normal to misplace your keys, to not know where you put your keys. That happens to all of us, whether we're 30, 50, or 80. We sometimes can lose our keys, and that's normal. Some of that can be due to you are in a hurry, or you've put your keys in a different place than you normally put them one day, and so therefore you forget where you put them. But what's not normal is if you maybe don't remember exactly what those keys are to be used for, or you pick up your house keys and you go out to your car and you try to start the car with your house keys, and first you cannot quite understand why those keys are not working to start your car. So that would be when we'd look at, something might be amiss or not quite right there, that there might be something wrong. Many things, there are several warning signs that we look at that there could be an issue, that somebody might want to go to their physician and get checked out. Some of those things we look at, and a lot of times these are things that family members might see in their loved one. The person themselves may not recognize these things on their own, but it might be things that their family member might see, or a caretaker or a friend even might see some of these things.
Can you give a few more examples? The keys are a good example. If you don't remember what the keys are for, that's a warning sign. Are there other examples?
Yeah, other warning signs might be loss of memory for recent events. Short-term memory loss is really one of the primary signs that we see, one of the first signs that we see that there could be something wrong. But that in and of itself is not enough to say that there's a memory, could be a potential memory issue. There are things like poor judgment, a person showing a lack of initiative, maybe getting lost in a familiar place, somebody that goes to church every Sunday. Well, you don't go to church every day, but you go to church often enough that you should remember where it's located. So you might get lost on the way to church, or it could be changes in mood or changes in personality. Somebody who's always been a very upbeat person and the life of the party, all of a sudden you're starting to see that person not being as outgoing and friendly, or somebody who maybe always was able to balance their checkbook. They were meticulous about balancing their checkbook, and all of a sudden they start showing signs of being late on bills for a couple of months. Families noticing that the mail is not being opened as it should, or we've even seen people paying bills twice or 3 times, not realizing that they've already paid the bill. There's also one of the other things that we see is maybe a loss of orientation to time or place. One of the things that we see here is individuals that maybe might have a doctor's appointment on a Thursday afternoon, and they show up to the doctor on Tuesday afternoon, and then they're told, no, your appointment's on Thursday, and then they show up again Wednesday. So it might be things like that that a family member might start to see, or a friend, or even forgetting about an appointment. Somebody who's been meticulously on time for things is showing up late for different events, or they might be blaming their family member for never telling them about the birthday party that was supposed to happen at 4 o'clock on Saturday. And they get angry at their family members saying, you never told me there was a party, but yet they were told several times, and they forget and don't show up.
So especially if you're a caregiver or a neighbor, so pay attention to these warning signs. But for most of us who worry about retaining our memory, are there ways that we can be sure to keep our memory active?
Yes, of course there are many things that people can do to help keep their brain active. And a lot of things you hear about on the news, or you see on the internet, or latest things that people might hear about to keep your brain active. And it's important to review those things and think about doing those things for yourself. Some of the things probably many people know about are things like doing crossword puzzles or Sudoku, or things like keeping your mind active, as active as possible. But more importantly, it's things like getting enough sleep at night, making sure your brain has the opportunity to rest, because that's the time when your brain really takes to recuperate from the day, and it processes through much more than you know while you're sleeping.
Right.
Getting physical exercise. People that are physically active are at a lower incidence have a lower incidence of developing Alzheimer's disease. And of course, those that are mentally active and keep mentally stimulated have a lower incidence of developing Alzheimer's disease. Socially interacting with people is very, very important to keep your brain healthy and active, especially interacting with people that you don't know very well. As a matter of fact, interacting with people you don't know very well is one of the most difficult things that your brain can do. Because you're really having to learn a lot of new information about people at that time. And you're forcing your brain to really work and be active. Dancing, learning how to dance, or learning a new language, those are things that a person can do to help keep their brain active and fit and maintain their brain. A key thing we look at too is breaking from routines. We do know that routines are good for people. Most people like routines, and especially as we get older, we get kind of set in our routine. Maybe we like to eat the same thing every day for breakfast, or we like to go to the same restaurant whenever we go out to eat, or we have a routine to our day that we just get used to. And that's very common. It's comfortable for people to get like that. But what can happen to us is we're not using our brains and stretching them, essentially, in a way that we're able to make them more active and get them more fit. So things like breaking from our routines can be important and can be a good way and a simple way for older adults to keep their brains healthy and active. An example of that might be when you go shopping to the grocery store, you probably take the same way to get there every day whenever you go.
Right.
Try a different route to get to the grocery store. Or maybe you have a different certain pattern that you use whenever you get to the grocery store. You go to the produce aisle first, then the meat, and then so forth. Try going the opposite way. You'd be amazed at how you're going to be working your brain in a different way, and you might even get a little frustrated with yourself because you're having to...
You have to remember, was I there or wasn't I?
Yes, yeah. Another thing a person can do is to, if you wear a watch, wear your watch on the opposite hand. That's very tricky, and but it's fun, and it's stimulating your brain in a little bit different way, and using part of your brain that you may not be used to using on a regular basis.
Oh, do you have two sides of the brain? Do you use the other side when you change routines?
Yes. Yeah, you're forcing your brain to use a different part of your brain. It could be left versus right hemisphere, but you're basically you're forcing your brain to have to use different muscles in it than what you're typically using when you're using a routine on a regular basis.
Very interesting. Now, how does physical exercise, for instance, I read time and again how important it is physically and mentally. What does it do to your brain?
Well, physical exercise really gets your blood flowing. It gets your endorphins going in your body, and getting blood flow to your brain is important. In people, especially with certain types of dementia, what we see is brain atrophy due to blood loss or lack of blood flow to the brain. And when you're exercising, you're increasing blood flow to your body, but you're also increasing blood flow to your brain. And so exercise can be a tremendous help in that. And particularly if you do any kind of exercise where you're having to follow a specific routine, like an aerobic exercise where you're in an aerobics class or yoga, those kinds of exercises are particularly beneficial because you're having to not only use your physical body, but you're using your brain to follow along with a certain type of a routine. And so you're using really every part of your body and your brain to get that physical exercise, and you're stimulating body and mind.
That's so. The exercise is very important. You mentioned socialization is important.
Yes.
Changing routines is important. I'd just like to repeat some of what else was.
So changing routines is important. Socialization, dancing. Doing crossword puzzles, learning a new language, or learning how to use a computer, or any type of opportunity you might have to learn something new are all going to be those are all going to be great things to help improve your memory. We know there's no way to prevent Alzheimer's disease and dementia, and we know that there's not a cure. But the things that we're talking about right now are all things that have been shown to possibly help either prevent it or halt its progression from happening. When you do some of these mentally stimulating activities and you keep your brain as active as possible, you are increasing your mental reserve, which is really helping your brain to ward off Alzheimer's disease, so to speak. And studies have shown that persons that have a high mental reserve and are using their brain actively throughout their lifespan, if they are put next to somebody that also has the same level of cognitive impairment as they do, they will show a slower decline in their mental impairment, in their cognitive impairment, than somebody who doesn't have as high of a mental reserve. So keeping your brain active, keeping your body active, it's the old adage, use it or lose it.
Use it or lose it, right? So use it. This mental reserve is intriguing because it may offer comfort to many of us who feel that experience that we have may help, even if there's a bit of a memory loss, the experience is embedded in here. Absolutely.
When you look at, particularly looking at older workers versus younger workers. Many times older workers feel as though they're at a little bit of a disadvantage because they're getting older, and younger people kind of have all this new knowledge that they're learning, and that's all good. However, persons that are a little bit older, have many, many more life experiences to draw upon. They have wisdom that a younger person may not necessarily have, and they've had also mistakes that they might have made throughout their lifetime which they can draw upon. So if you've made a mistake in your life, you're not going to make that same mistake again.
I hope.
Yeah, you hope. You have so much more life experience, world knowledge, world experience, cultural experience with which to draw from that really is such a benefit to all of us.
Wonderful. And that is called mental reserve. That's good to know. So there's much comfort in the fact that aging may also bring this mental reserve experience, wisdom that can help us in remembering.
Absolutely.
Now, these are all good points for people who do not have Alzheimer's or the dementia. If I notice some of these red flags that you mentioned, what do I need to do?
Well, we always recommend that an individual or their family bring them to a physician that can do a complete workup. Many times a person might be experiencing some of these signs, warning signs we talked about a little while ago, and they may not necessarily have a memory loss, an Alzheimer's disease, or some other form of memory impairment. There are other possible medical conditions that might be causing some of the symptoms, things like possibly dehydration or some other medical condition like blood pressure or I mentioned dehydration, or maybe malnutrition, or possibly a medication interaction that the person might have had that could be, or even depression that could be causing these signs and symptoms. So we always encourage either the individual, if they're worried about their memory, or their family members, to take them to a physician and get a complete medical workup to rule out any other possible medical conditions that could possibly be causing the symptoms that they're experiencing. The other thing that can happen is people might have some maybe age-related deficits that could be causing some things that might appear like a memory loss. A perfect example of this would be making sure, a person that might have some hearing loss, listening to the person and understanding and speaking loud enough so that the person can hear and understand and comprehend what might be being taken place in a conversation. You might think the person's not not able to understand what you're saying, when it may actually be that they may be having difficulty hearing what you're saying.
Right. So hearing loss can create a situation where you don't hear and you don't pay attention anymore, and you don't, you just can't remember. There's nothing to remember,
process, right.
Nothing to process. So that's very important to help people hear and understand what's going on, because
right.
It may not be a memory problem.
You know, we always try to encourage people to rule everything else out before they look at it being some form of a memory loss, because we know that memory loss, Alzheimer's disease, and dementia, they are not curable at this time, and so they are illnesses that will only get worse. So it's important for people to make sure that there's nothing else that could be wrong that could possibly be corrected or compensated for in some way that will, rule any kind of a dementia out.
Right. So to sum up, most people do not get Alzheimer's or dementia, right?
That's the statistics really are that 1 in 10 people between the ages of 65 and 74 will develop Alzheimer's disease. 1 in 5 people between the ages of 75 and 84 will develop Alzheimer's disease or dementia, and in people age 85 and over, half of them will at some point develop some type of a memory loss.
But there are ways that we can improve our memory and possibly delay some of the symptoms of dementia.
Absolutely.
Fascinating, Robin. Is there anything else of importance you'd like to add?
I think just to summarize what you just said, it's important to understand we can't completely prevent Alzheimer's disease or dementia, but if we keep our minds active, our bodies active, we can possibly prevent or delay it from happening to us.
Oh, that's such good news. Thank you, Robin, very, very
You're
much.
welcome.
Fascinating. And thank you for listening, and we hope that you learned about memory and that there are ways that we can keep our minds active and develop brain power and improve our lives. So that is good news. And if you would like to be in touch with Robin P. Sack, you may call her at the Arden Courts in Glen Ellen. Her number is 630-469-5500. Or you can call us at the Township at 630-719-6682. And thank you again for joining us today.